Dealer reveals why stackers are offloading silver right now. Inside one coin shop, something strange is happening. For 9 hours straight, the door never stopped opening. But almost no one was buying, they were selling. 85% of them selling. Silver just climbed back near $70 an ounce. And yet, the very people who once couldn't stop buying it are now walking in, one after another, handing it back. Why would anyone let go of an asset the moment it starts rising again? What do they know that the rest of the market doesn't? Or what did they lose that made them stop believing? Stay with us, because by the end of this, you will understand exactly what is happening beneath the surface, and whether this is the biggest mistake stackers are making right now, or the biggest opportunity hiding in plain sight. Welcome back, dear friend, to Next Alert. If you are one of our longtime viewers, you already know why you keep coming back. Because here, we don't chase noise, we look for the truth behind it. And if this is your first time joining us, please do an old friend a favor. Find that subscribe button. Yes, the one right there below this video. And press it. It costs you nothing, but it means everything to us, because it tells us you want to keep learning alongside this community. And tell us, in the comments below, where are you watching this from today? We would love to know which city, which country is spending these few minutes with us. Now, let's get into it. In the early months of this year, silver did something it had not done in over 4 decades. It surged past $120 an ounce, shattering records and pulling in a wave of new buyers who had never owned a single coin before. Financial commentary called it historic. Retail investors called it the trade of a lifetime. And for a brief window, it seemed as though silver had permanently broken free from its old ceiling. Then, just as quickly as it rose, it fell. Within months, the price was cut in half, tumbling back toward the $60 range. The euphoria that had gripped so many first-time buyers turned into confusion, and confusion soon turned into regret. Now, months later, silver is climbing again. It has pushed back above $60, briefly touching $70 in overnight trading, and analysts describe this as a genuine breakout from a prolonged downward trend. By almost every technical measure, this should be a moment of renewed optimism for anyone holding physical silver. Yet on the ground, inside the coin shops where real transactions happen, the opposite story is unfolding. Dealers report that the overwhelming majority of foot traffic right now is not composed of buyers. It is composed of sellers. In one shop alone, the ratio of people selling silver versus buying it stood at nearly 85 to 15. Doors opened early because someone was already waiting outside to sell. 9 straight hours passed before the last transaction of the day, and it, too, was a sale. This is the paradox at the heart of the current market. Prices are recovering. Sentiment is not. The very people who once could not get their hands on silver fast enough during the January rally are now the ones lining up to release it, even as the metal shows renewed strength. For the business community, and for anyone serious about understanding how capital actually behaves under pressure, this divergence deserves close attention. Markets are frequently misread by focusing only on price charts, while ignoring the psychology of the people trading within them. What is happening with silver right now is not simply a commodity story. It is a live demonstration of how emotional capital enters a market at its most euphoric point, suffers when reality corrects that euphoria, and exits precisely when patience would have been rewarded. This series will examine that behavior in detail. It will explore who these sellers are, why they are choosing to exit now of all times, where their capital is migrating, and what this pattern reveals about disciplined decision-making under uncertainty. The lessons extend far beyond silver itself, into how businesses raise capital, how entrepreneurs manage risk, and how individuals position themselves ahead of cycles rather than reacting after the fact. The story that follows is not about a metal. It is about the difference between those who react and those who understand. To understand this sell-off, it helps to separate the crowd into 2 distinct groups, because they are not behaving the same way at all, even though they are standing in the same line at the same counter. The first group arrived late. They entered during the January frenzy, when silver's climb toward $120 was dominating headlines and dinner table conversations. Many of them had never purchased a precious metal before in their lives. They were not driven by strategy. They were driven by momentum, by the fear of missing an opportunity that seemed to be accelerating without them. When the correction came and the price was cut in half, these buyers were left holding an asset that had, in their eyes, betrayed them. Disappointment set in quickly, and disappointment is now walking through the door to sell. The second group looks nothing like the first. These are the long-term accumulators, people who have been buying silver for years, sometimes decades, without ever checking the spot price before making a purchase. One dealer describes a customer who has come in nearly every week for close to 8 years, purchasing rolls of coins, regardless of what the market is doing that day. Another buys a single ounce almost daily, treating it less like a trade and more like a habit, the same way someone might set aside a portion of every paycheck into a savings account. These buyers are not participating in the panic. They are, in many cases, on the opposite side of it entirely. Layered beneath both groups is a third, quieter force, one that has nothing to do with silver's price at all. Real financial pressure, bills that must be paid, jobs that have disappeared, medical costs that cannot wait for a better market cycle. For these sellers, silver was never meant to be a long-term conviction. It was meant to be a reserve, a fallback asset to be converted back into cash, exactly when life demanded it. Their selling is not a verdict on silver's future. It is simply the asset performing its intended function. What makes this moment particularly revealing is the parallel migration happening alongside the selling. A meaningful share of the capital leaving silver is not disappearing from precious metals altogether. It is rotating directly into gold, which continues to move out of dealer inventory almost as fast as it arrives. The appeal is emotional as much as it is financial. Gold carries a certain permanence in the public imagination, a sense of historical trust that silver, still recovering from its sharp correction, has temporarily lost. For anyone building a business or managing capital, this three-part anatomy offers a valuable framework. Not all selling pressure is equal. Some of it reflects genuine necessity. Some of it reflects emotional exhaustion following an ill-timed entry. And distinguishing between the two, rather than reacting to the volume of sellers alone, is often where the real advantage lies. There is a detail in this story that most casual observers overlook entirely because it has nothing to do with the price of silver itself. It has to do with cash, actual physical cash, and the growing difficulty of simply having enough of it on hand. When the majority of people walking through the door are selling rather than buying, a dealer's problem shifts from sourcing inventory to sourcing money. Every transaction requires an outlay, and when 85% of transactions are purchases from the public rather than sales to them, that outlay compounds fast. To keep enough cash flowing, dealers have started wholesaling a portion of their inventory daily, essentially selling silver back into the broader market almost as quickly as it comes in the front door, purely to remain liquid enough to keep buying from the next person in line. This creates a quieter, less visible strain than price volatility, but arguably a more important one. One dealer described being flatly turned away by his own bank while trying to withdraw cash, simply because the bank did not have enough on hand to give him. If a bank cannot supply cash to a business account holder on a routine business day, that is not a silver story anymore. That is a liquidity story, and liquidity stories tend to surface in the background long before they become headlines. This is compounded by a second, structural pressure. As the spot price of silver has more than doubled compared to just a few years ago, the same volume of physical transactions now requires significantly more cash to execute. A dealer who once needed a certain amount of currency on hand to handle a day's worth of buying now needs more than double that amount, even if the number of customers walking through the door has not changed at all. Rising prices have quietly raised the capital requirements of simply operating a small, cash-based business. Compare this to the gold side of the counter, where the dynamic runs in the opposite direction entirely. Gold moves out of inventory almost as fast as it enters, creating a bifurcated market sitting side by side under the same roof. One metal is flooding in and struggling to move out. The other is flooding out and struggling to stay in stock. Two commodities, one shop, two entirely different liquidity realities. For those studying markets from a business perspective, this is the part of the story worth sitting with the longest. Price charts are visible to everyone. Liquidity stress inside the intermediary layer, the dealers, the banks, the businesses standing between buyers and sellers, is rarely visible until it becomes a crisis. Recognizing friction before it becomes failure, whether it shows up as cash shortages, wholesale dependency, or banks unable to fulfill basic withdrawal requests, is precisely the kind of early signal that separates reactive observers from those who position themselves ahead of the shift. The metal is only half the story. The system moving it is the other half, and right now that system is under quiet, mounting pressure. There's a moment in every market cycle when the crowd's behavior stops being a reflection of the asset and becomes, instead, a signal in its own right. That moment has arrived for silver, and the signal is unmistakable to anyone willing to read it correctly. When the overwhelming majority of people in a market are rushing toward the exit, disciplined observers do not see danger. They see opportunity forming in real time. This is not a theoretical principle borrowed from a textbook. It is a lived response. One investor openly stating that when he hears the crowd is dumping an asset en masse, his instinct is to interpret that as an invitation to buy, not a warning to flee. Mass exit, in this framework, is not evidence that an asset has failed. It is evidence that emotion has temporarily overtaken judgment across a large portion of the market. To understand why this contrarian instinct works, it helps to examine the small number of participants who never joined the panic in the first place. Consider the customer who has walked into the same shop nearly every week for close to 8 years. purchasing rolls of coins without ever glancing at where the spot price sits that day. Consider another who buys a single ounce almost daily, treating the purchase less like a market bet and more like a disciplined ritual, no different from setting aside a fixed amount from every paycheck. Neither of these individuals is trying to predict tomorrow's headline. Both are simply repeating a small, consistent action over an extended period of time, and both have, at various points, been able to convert years of steady accumulation into meaningfully larger gains than the people chasing short-term swings. Set against this discipline is a very different archetype, the speculator, the individual attempting to time entries and exits with the precision of a day trader. This approach carries a structural disadvantage that is often invisible until it is too late. Every transaction includes a premium above the raw spot price, a built-in cost of doing business. For someone trying to profit from rapid short-term price movement, that premium quietly erodes the margin needed to actually come out ahead. The math simply does not favor speed. It favors patience. This is the deeper principle worth carrying beyond silver entirely into any business decision involving capital, timing, or risk. Reactive capital, capital that enters at the peak of public excitement and exits at the depth of public disappointment, is almost always the capital that loses the most over time. Patient capital, capital that continues its plan regardless of what the headlines say on any given day, tends to be the capital still standing and still growing once the cycle completes. Dealers themselves acknowledge what would change this current dynamic. A return toward the historic highs seen earlier this year, prices approaching or exceeding $100 an ounce, would likely bring the sidelined buyers back in full force, just as it did during the original rally. But that also means the current window, while sentiment remains depressed and selling remains dominant, may represent the exact conditions that disciplined, patient capital is built to take advantage of. The crowd is not always wrong, but the crowd is, more often than not, early to panic and late to conviction. The businesses, investors, and entrepreneurs who understand that distinction are the ones who tend to be standing on the right side of the next chapter.